units oscillating quasi-periodically with a large amplitude. This is for 2 units. If you couple more units, you can get even more complicated behavior. So for instance, for 10 units, you can get chaotic oscillations. All of these oscillations, again, emerging because the long transients interact with the coupling in the system. And what I want to show now for this first part is how this occurs. So the mechanism that generates this. So just to give a bit more detail about the units, they follow these differential equations. It's basically a simple model for neurons following this Hodgkin-Huxley conductance-based formalism. What matters for us now at this point is that if you parameterize this in a sensible way, you get a state space that looks like this. And you can see here very clearly the excitability in the phase portrait, right? You see all these arrows showing that the trajectories have to go all the way around here before converging to the stable equilibrium. And if you start near this unstable focus that's here, the trajectories have to spiral outwards along this stable manifold. So this green line here is a stable manifold of a saddle point that's here. The red line is the unstable manifold of the saddle. So the trajectories have to spiral out. They, of course, can't cross the threshold, so they have to spiral. They slowly, they find this region here between the red and the green lines, between the stable and the unstable manifold, where they can go through. And this is basically a tunnel where I have a zoomed-in version here. And in this tunnel, they slow down near the saddle point and eventually converge to the stable equilibrium. So here you have this long transients in a wide area of the state space. I'm just showing the animation here again, just to explain what this arrow means. So the arrow is just the instantaneous vector field. So the vector field that the unit is feeling at each position. So it's basically just x dot and y dot at that point. It gives you an idea of where the unit is going to move next, right? And you see it becomes smaller here when the unit slows down, and then points to the left as it goes to the stable equilibrium. And when we couple these units in a network, we add diffusive coupling to this local dynamic. So the dynamics of the units without the coupling, in green here is the local, and with the coupling in red, it's just a diffusive term. And this is inspired for neurons in gap junctions. This is one way in which neurons can communicate. In ecological models, it can also model migration, so it's a very versatile yet simple form of coupling. And in the animations, you'll see now 2 arrows, one corresponding to the local dynamics and the other corresponding to the diffusive coupling. And diffusive coupling points from one unit to the other. In the case of 2 units interacting, as you see here, you just have the distance between the 2 units. So geometrically, the diffusive coupling can be interpreted as just pulling one unit to the other. So this is what we have here. Notice the diffusive coupling pointing from purple to orange and orange to purple, and the local dynamics typically being of a way larger magnitude. So this is on this large amplitude periodic attractor. And to get an intuition, to actually see the mechanism in play, you can just take a look at the units. Let's focus on the orange unit here. And I'm just want to check if everyone's here. I think, yes, right? Everything's okay. Yes, it's just this fear of live presentations, but I guess you're all there. So focus on the orange unit here. See how it approaches the saddle point, which is this red square here. It slows down. As it slows down, the magnitude of the local dynamics decreases. Then it's still slow, and the purple unit is going around. Eventually, they get quite far away, right? Diametrically opposite here. And you see the coupling also increases. And this is, of course, also the same for the purple unit. It's a symmetric system. So here again, it slows down near the saddle point. Its local dynamics decreases. Its coupling increases. So what's going on? I guess you can already get a brief idea of the mechanism. Is actually quite simple. But to show this a bit more clearly, I'll simplify a bit now in a stationary figure. And now it's just one unit at different time points. So each circle here is the same unit at different time points along the attractor. And there's just one arrow, which is the coupling. So now I'm not showing the local dynamics. And this black solid line here shows the trajectory of the unit on the attractor, on the way to the attractor. This is what we were seeing before in the animation. But in the dashed line, which you can see more clearly here, you have the dynamics of the unit uncoupled, so without the coupling, but starting the same initial condition as before. You see that for a wide region in state space, the uncoupled unit and the coupled unit have similar dynamics, roughly, right? But they diverge here near the saddle point. The uncoupled unit goes to the stable equilibrium, as we saw initially, and the coupled unit goes to the right, back towards the oscillation area. And why does it go to the right instead of going to the left? Well, because the coupling is pulling it to the right? So as this unit slows down here, the stable equilibrium to the left is pulling it leftwards, but the coupling is pulling it rightwards towards the other unit. And if this coupling is strong enough, you can show the system has a bifurcation that generates a stable periodic orbit because the unit is reinjected into this transient region. So it goes around quickly, slows down near the saddle point, wants to go to the left, but the coupling pulls it to the right. And then it goes along an excitation again. Coupling pulls it to the right once again, and it keeps doing this oscillation periodically or quasi-periodically, depending on the strength of the coupling. So basically, the unit is just being trapped in this long transient region of state space, in this excitability region. This is the basic mechanism. And if you get more units coupled together, for instance, 10 units, and for some coupling strength, for instance, here just picked kind of arbitrarily and with a randomly chosen topology, you look at the attractors that coexist in state space, and you find, in this case here, 4, 8, 9 attractors coexisting. You have limit cycles of different kinds, you have toroids, you have chaos, all coexisting, even though, again, the units in isolation only have a stable equilibrium as an attractor. In the paper, we show the bifurcations that also give rise to this, but the general mechanism is this trapping phenomenon, which I wanted to show. So just to summarize this point here, as I mentioned, there are different bifurcations, but the same qualitative mechanism, which is the trapping in transient regions. And there's another very nice example that I wanted to mention here from Everton Medeiros, who's now a professor in UNESP. I guess some of you here, surely some of you here know him, and it's just a very nice example of this also at play. There he was looking at Dufin oscillators coupled, and these Dufin oscillators have in their state space also a long transient, but not this excitable transient that I was showing. Instead, they have a chaotic saddle. So a chaotic set that's unstable. And this is shown here in this black dots. When you couple the units, you get a similar phenomenon where the units want to escape their chaotic saddle. They are repulsed away from the chaotic saddle, but the coupling of the units already trapped on the chaotic saddle brings other units back in. So again, you have this competition between repulsion away from the transient and the coupling bringing units into the transient, and they can be trapped there. And this has important consequences to how the system can synchronize and so on. So again, it's this example of transients impacting the long-term solution of a system. For the next part of my talk, I wanted to talk a bit more deeply into how long transients can be generated. So we just saw one example of long transient, which is this excitability. But there are many different types of long transients, very different mechanisms that can generate them. And in this work, we are looking into this mostly for autonomous systems, but inspired by observations, for instance, in the brain of different kinds of long transients that are seen in experiments. Before I show some examples of this, I just wanted to mention how metastability is quickly viewed in dynamical systems, and there are two common examples. One is a bistable system with noise. So here, let's say you have a gradient system. With this potential energy, you have two attractors on the bottom of each of the wells. When you add noise to the system, the trajectory no longer stays on the bottom of the well. Of course, it is forced by this noise term, which eventually is able to bring it across the hill past the Bayesian boundary into the other attractor. It will stay there for a while, then eventually switch back to the original, to the first attractor, stay there for some time, and keep switching, right? To have this noise hopping phenomenon, where now you don't see the attractors anymore, but you see instead long transients around what used to be the attractors. Another example, as I mentioned already before, is a chaotic saddle, where the units can stay on this chaotic saddle for quite a long time, but eventually they will also escape the chaotic saddle and they won't come back. This is also mentioned as a metastable regime, and it's also an example of a long-lived transient. In the brain, there are many examples, and here I'm just showing a few figures. I won't really dive into details. But for example, this is in a study looking into how mice, if I'm not mistaken, mice encode different tastings. So you give them like sugary water or like lime juice or salty water with salt, and you measure firing rate in a region of the cortex. And you find that the activity of the neurons in this network evolves over time through different states, each state lasting for some time and then switching to other states. So I also have this long transients there. They're also mentioned as metastable regimes, by the way, so this is why I'm adding them, right? They're termed metastable. Another example of metastable dynamics, for instance, is this really cool paper, which was also measuring like firing rates of neurons in Drosophila, in the fruit fly, and they also observed that during flight, the activity of the system stays on a long transit for a while, then quickly switches to other transients here. So you see each color corresponds to a different state, which is in this case a different basically pattern of synchronization along these neurons. Another example is, for instance, in EEG studies, now looking not at single neurons, but at a sort of spatial average of them in a way. And you also see this hopping between different kinds of states, all of which last for some time and switch to other states. So these long transients, which are also termed metastable. So then we have this correspondence between metastability and long transients. And we were interested in how this can be generated and what are the dynamical properties of long transients. To start with this, I'll give an example that is not metastable. So a simple multistable system, going back, for instance, to the bistable case, as I explained before, right? So, for instance, you have a ball that rolls down the hill and goes to one of the equilibria in the system, and then it stays there forever. If you add noise to the system, like I showed before, now the ball, the trajectory, will stay around the well for a while, but then switches to another well. But it can stay on one well for quite a long time, right? So whereas before you had this invariance, you had trajectories staying in a region forever, now you don't, but you have trajectories that almost stay there forever. You have this notion of almost invariance. Trajectories have a high probability of staying in one of the two wells for a very long time. And you can formalize this better, but I just wanted to mention this intuition here. As you go from multistability to metastability, you also go from invariance to almost invariance. This is one way of thinking about long transient metastable regimes in state space. And there are, of course, many different mechanisms that can generate these metastable regimes. One way is through ghosts. For instance, ghosts of equilibria. I'll explain this in the next slide. So for now, I'll just skip this. I'll mention some other examples that I don't have later. I already explained this idea of a stable heteroclinic cycle, right, where you have saddle points, again, whose invariant manifolds are connected. So trajectories approach this heteroclinic cycle. It can be attracting, and they hop between saddle points, but every time they approach one saddle point, they get closer to the stable manifold, and they spend more and more time close to the saddle point. Another example is that of on-off intermittency. So you have, in some systems, an invariant manifold. For instance, in networks, you can define this synchronization manifold, where all the units have the same state. And this invariant manifold can be stable sometimes, but if you change parameters, it can also undergo some bifurcations that render it transversally unstable. And what can happen is sort of a mixture, in a way, of the two, where the invariant manifold is structurally transversally unstable in some regions, but not in others. So the trajectories can approach this manifold, like in this green line here, and they can be completely synchronized for a while. So you see here in the distance between, so the Euclidean distance between the two units in this network, or here in the actual the delta x between the variables of the units here, it's basically 0. The units are on the invariant manifold, but eventually they escape, and then they visit this higher dimensional part of state space, and then they eventually come back for some time. So there's this switching between synchronization and desynchronization spontaneously. There are many other examples which we mentioned in the paper. For instance, an attractor merging crisis, where before the crisis you have two chaotic attractors, but after the crisis, the attractors merge together. They form a single sort of unified chaotic attractor. But the trajectories basically have this memory, quote-unquote memory, of the previous state, because they stay on the region of one chaotic attractor for a long time, then they switch to the region of the other chaotic attractor, and they keep switching between these two different regions. So it looks like they're staying on two long transients, on two almost invariant regions. Chaotic shadow I already mentioned before, and the attractor hopping phenomena I already mentioned before. And there are, again, many other mechanisms for generating this. But I just wanted to focus on one which is particularly interesting to me and to the group in the moment, which are ghosts of equilibria. A very simple way of generating them is, you have a to-do system where basically the x variable is just a quadratic term. For this alpha parameter below 0, you have two equilibria in your system. You have a stable node on the left and a saddle point here on the right. As the parameter alpha approaches 0, these two fixed points, these two equilibria, approach each other in phase space. They eventually collide at alpha equals 0. And after that, near alpha 0, but positive, you have a ghost. So you have this region of slow flow. Notice here in the phase portrait, the trajectories approach the ghost on the left through three different directions, right? Up, down, and from the left. They slow down near the ghost and exit through the right. The ghost basically funnels trajectories, slows them down, and then spits them out on the right. And this occurs here near a saddle node bifurcation. So X here is basically undergoing a saddle node bifurcation. On one side, you have the two equilibria on the left. On the other side, you have the ghost. And this is the figure I showed before, where you have basically a ghost embedded on a chaotic attractor just before a periodic window is opened. And trajectory can, it displays often, sometimes very chaotic behavior, but then it also goes to a very periodic behavior. So here the ghost is a ghost of a period 3 orbit. And so you see the trajectory for all of this time looks very periodic, but then it quickly switches to a very chaotic behavior, and it keeps switching back and forth spontaneously. In general, though, as I mentioned, ghosts have these nice properties of funneling and slowing down, and I'll show soon how this can be useful. But I just wanted to mention that ghosts can also be connected in state space, similar to the heteroclinic cycle that I mentioned before. So in this figure here, we have three ghosts of equilibrium in state space, but they are embedded on a limit cycle. So before I showed you this example of ghosts embedded on a chaotic attractor, they can also be embedded on a limit cycle. And then, I'm sorry I don't have an animation here, but what will happen to the trajectory is that it will approach one ghost, slow down near it, and then exit the ghost, go to another ghost, stay there for a while, go to the other ghost, stay there for a while, and then come back. So you can keep revolving periodically in this case, but passing a certain amount of time near each of the ghosts. The trajectory, the time series looks like this, as I mentioned before, right? So you have this hopping between the different ghosts, and you can add noise, and the system performs quite well over a large sort of interval of noise values you can add. This is displayed here in this recent PRL paper. And it's interesting to contrast these ghost cycles with the stable heteroclinic cycles. So ghost here on the left, heteroclinic here on the right, because heteroclinic cycles are often used to explain metastable dynamics in experiments, in particular for experiments in neuroscience. But heteroclinic cycles have problems. They can be very structurally unstable. If you change some parameters, they can disappear. They rely on lots of symmetries in your system, whereas ghost cycles not so much. And noise can really destroy a heteroclinic cycle, but it doesn't destroy the ghosts so much. And just to mention how ghosts can be useful, I selected 2 papers here from the group. So for instance, now shifting gears a bit from models into actually living systems, so cells. They were interested in how cells navigate in an environment with changing chemical signals. And how typically this is modeled is to think that a cell receives a certain signal, it goes to an attractor, and this attractor corresponds to the cell moving in a certain direction. The problem with this view is that the attractor can get stuck on the attractor. So if you remove the signal, the attractor can stay on the attractor and keep moving to where the signal used to be, but is no longer. And if you get a new signal, the trajectory, the signal may not be strong enough to switch the trajectory from one attractor into the other. So to deal with this, a nicer model in the sense is a model with ghosts. So here you have this bifurcation diagram. On the y-axis, you have one variable which you can measure in the system. On the x-axis, you have a parameter which you can control. This is basically your input, and the idea is that the trajectory, the cell typically stays in this purple region here. And in the group, they actually did experiments looking into these receptors called EGFR receptors, and they have models that are fit to the data, and often they can be poised near this saddle node bifurcation, so with ghosts in their state space. So the receptor network is naturally here. The pose, the input, puts you to the left in this case. It puts you in this region here where you have an attractor that corresponds to high activity when the cell is moving. So the idea is you give a pose in a certain direction, the cell is switched here to the left, goes to this attractor, starts moving. You remove the pose, the state space goes back to this region here with the ghost, and the trajectory has to go from the attractor, S2, through the ghost before converging to the basal state. And this ghost is a ghost of the high activity state, so it corresponds to the cell moving towards that direction, but only for a certain amount of time, right? So it has this dynamic memory of the signal. The trajectory, the cell moves for a while to where the signal is. If you have no more signal, the cell eventually stops. But if you have a new signal while on this ghost, the trajectory can switch very flexibly to the new signal. So the cell has this dynamic memory of the signal, but is also very flexible to changing inputs. I also had another example here. I see I'm over time. So I'll just mention the idea that cells have to classify different kinds of inputs. So certain inputs lead it to proliferate, to divide. Other inputs lead it to differentiate. So there are very different behaviors for cells. And this can be achieved if you use also, if you measure from experiments and also do models. You see that the presence of ghosts in state space allow a dynamical system to perform classification tasks. So it's also a cool example of ghosts in living systems. So just to summarize, basically what I was, the point I was trying to make is that long transients can have a very deep impact on a system's dynamics and on its function. It can generate rich multi-stable dynamics in a network. It can allow a system to perform different kinds of perfect computations, which can be biologically relevant. And there are different kinds of long transients, each with its own specificity, with its own advantages or potentially disadvantages. And I am particularly interested now in this idea of dynamical systems performing computations and how transient dynamics can help in this. And I just wanted to have a quick shout out to Roberto Budzinski, who's now in Canada, and is also interested in this. So if you're interested in this topic, I also recommend you check his research out. But just going back to what I'm interested in now is working memory tasks. So how animals solve working memory tasks or dynamics in state space that allows for this. And so, for instance, how we learn new novel sequences. And also how you can detect and characterize transient dynamics. So this is basically it. Just some quick advertisements. There's this very nice attractors package for finding attractors in state space, which can be very helpful. And I just wanted to mention this, that Mateus Palmeiro, who's now in Potsdam, is interested in organizing a workshop on transient dynamics. And also for next year in Dynamics Days, I'm also thinking about organizing a mini symposium on transients and computation. So if anyone is interested, please let me know. And that's it. Sorry, I'm a bit over time. And I hope you're still there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Khaled.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Question, comments? I have a question.
Yeah, please.
You mentioned the long transient, but how do you get a quantitative measure of the transient?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is something I've been thinking a bit about. One way in which you can do that is to use this almost invariant set formalism. So I just mentioned briefly the idea, right? But I can explain a bit in more detail. The idea is, let's suppose you define a certain region in your state space. And you can look at the probability of trajectories once inside this region to stay on this region for a certain period of time, delta t. If you have an invariant region, this probability is exactly 1. Trajectories always stay there. If you have a long transient, this will be an almost invariant region where this probability is not 1, but is very high, very close to 1. So you can, in that sense, compute, have a quantitative measure of long transients through this probability. And this was formalized by people like Gary Froyland. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. And Padberg, who's in Germany also. Froyland is in Australia. So if you're interested, I can also send you the references. They're also in our perspective paper.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I will write you later to ask for those references.
Mm-hmm.
Question, comment? Mario?
Oh, yes. This reminds me of a work many years ago by Kaneko on coupled map lattices, where he, reported chaotic supertransients, where the transient time scales exponentially with the size of the system. I noticed that your systems are small. I mean, just 2 units. Or did you explore the size effect? I mean, did you study large networks with large number of units? What is the effect? Are different effects?
So in the first part of my talk, yeah, indeed, I only looked at a few coupled units. And I mean, we know the scaling there. Also, you basically explode. The number of trajectories really explodes with the system size. But in this case of the transient, Yes. So first thing is, yeah, the work from Connect is really interested, and I should have actually mentioned this here. This idea of chaotic itinerancy, right? And the description can be a bit hard to follow sometimes, but to the best of my understanding, what this actually means is you have chaotic shadows in your state space, and they're also connected. So it's like the stable heteroclinic cycle, but instead of having saddle points, you have chaotic saddles connected. In these mechanisms that I described here, for instance, the 6 mechanisms, they're not really restricted to low-dimensional systems. I mean, they can occur in arbitrary dimensions, or often come from, I mean, not necessarily generic bifurcations, but given, I mean, like, for instance, the heteroclinic cycle, under some symmetries, it can be made into a generic bifurcation. The ghosts also can occur in high-dimensional systems, for instance. So they don't really rely so much on the dimensionality of the system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kalel. It is not easy to, I don't know if these are a reaction to, here. Okay. Maybe you can move on to next talk. There are no more comment or question. We can move to Juan Pedro for the second part of this seminar. Okay, Juan Pedro Tarigo is from my university in Montevideo, Uruguay. He recently finished his bachelor in science, and he started his PhD in our group and in collaboration with Cristina Masoyer in Spain. So it is a great pleasure to listen to Juan Pedro. Okay.
Thank you, Arturo. Thank you, Albert, for the invitation. Thank you, Kalel, for the previous talk. Okay. Okay. Can you see the presentation there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk about time-delayed systems and multi-stability in time-delayed systems, and how can we quantify it via Bayesian entropy and then Bayesian stability, and well, how to use it to identify and hopefully predict bifurcations in this type of systems. So the outline, and this work is part of my master's degree in collaboration with my tutors, Arturo Martí and Cecilia Stari, and Cristina Masoyer. So the outline of this talk is as follows. I'm going to make a brief introduction of time-delayed systems and a brief introduction of a very simple time-delayed system, which is multi-stable, that is the delayed double-wall model. Then I'm going to introduce Bayesian entropy and show how we use Bayesian entropy to identify bifurcations in this type of systems. And then I'm going to go to a much more complicated model, such as the Mackey-Glass model, and I'm going to show how we explore the phase space of this type of systems using Bayesian entropy, and how we find new bifurcations in these type of systems. And well, then I'm going to conclude. So first of all, time-delayed systems are dynamical systems in which the evolution of the variables not only depends on their state, their current state, but they also depend on the state of the variable in a delayed time, in a previous time. So these systems are very important because delays are present in a lot of research areas such as biology or or computer sciences and such. And these systems are very interesting because they exhibit very rich phenomena in very simple systems. So you can have only one variable and a very simple system, and they exhibit chaos, for example, or you can have only one variable and a linear system, and it exhibits limit cycles also. And they're very interesting too because you need to define the state of the system. You need a continuous function in some interval, and that in continuous time systems, that makes the system infinite dimensional. So they're very simple to compute, but they're infinite dimensional, and they present a lot of multi-stability and a lot of multiple solutions and everything. So a simple model of a time-delayed system can be the delay double well. This is the normal form of the pitchfork bifurcation, but we introduced a delay in the variable. So the delay parameter is this tau. It is very simple to see that this system has three fixed point stable solutions like this, and analytically we can calculate a Hopf bifurcation line in where the fixed points give rise to oscillations. So this is the stability of the fixed points. We have here in the bottom left a region where we only have one stable solution, that is the fixed point in 0. Then in the right of the diagram, we have a region where we have two fixed point stable solutions, so we have B-stability. And then in the top left, we have the Hopf bifurcation in the solid line, and we have the region where we have oscillations. And here is an example of transient dynamics in the three of the regions. So what we're trying to do is explore this system and see if with Bayesian entropy we can anticipate this Hopf bifurcation line, and even if we can see this pitchfork bifurcation. So what we do here is, well, we simulated the system using a Runge-Kutta algorithm, and we determine to which attractor it evolves. And the change, when the thing that is different in this type of systems is you need a function to explore phase space, because phase space is infinite dimensional, as I said, and it's the space of functions defined in this interval minus tau to 0. So what we do to explore and to see this phase space is introduce a parametric function. In this case, is a sine function with two parameters, and we explore this parameter space of the initial condition function, and that is how we introduce phase space and to calculate Bayesian entropy, basically. So here we have 4 examples of 4 points. When we have white is one attractor, black is the other attractor in the bistable region. And we can see how it evolves, and then green is the oscillations. And we can see that this is not very common in non-delayed systems. We can see the coexistence of the two fixed points with the oscillations, which we didn't see in analytically, right? So then we use Bayesian entropy to see what happens near the bifurcations, and Bayesian entropy basically is a tool introduced by DASA in 2016 to quantify the uncertainty of the final state of a system due to uncertainties in the initial conditions. And it was recently used to study different type of bifurcations in non-delayed systems and now in delayed systems too. So to calculate Bayesian entropy, the computation is very easy. Actually, all you have to do is take the phase space of a system. This is the Duffing system. And what you do is divide the phase space in boxes of linear size epsilon, and you compute the probability of going to one attractor or other attractor, and you compute this p log p. That's why it's called entropy. And you sum in all boxes, in all attractors, and in all boxes, and you get the Bayesian entropy. And making some assumptions, Daza shows in his paper that Bayesian entropy can be written as this, where this term. So now this was a sum in boxes. Now this is a sum in frontiers, in Bayesian boundaries, and this first term is associated with the boundary size. Then epsilon is just the size of the boxes. Alpha is the uncertainty exponent, so it gives the fractal dimension or the box counting dimension of the boundary, and M is just the number of attractors that share the K boundary. And what we can do here then is compute Bayesian entropy in terms of the size of the box, and then we can see the slope of the curve gives us the uncertainty exponent, and then we have a way to quantify which of these three systems is more uncertain due to initial conditions than the other. And we can do that in terms of the size of the box, that the size of the box represents your uncertainty in the initial conditions, right? So how do we do that in time-delayed systems? Well, the phase space is infinite dimensional, but we just take 2D projections that are our parametric function that we took earlier. So the same diagrams as we had, and we compute Bayesian entropy in each of these diagrams. And so as we can see, we changed the parameter C, that it's the intensity of the system, not the delay parameter. And as we approach the Hopf bifurcation, what we have, all of these points are before the Hopf bifurcation. And what we can see is Bayesian entropy increases as we approach the bifurcation. But at some point here for the C equals minus 0.7, Bayesian entropy decreases drastically, right? So there's something happening there, and well, it's not a big surprise. The oscillations appear in the diagram, right? But well, instead of doing this, what we can do is vary the parameters, change the parameters of the system, and compute Bayesian entropy. So for the pitch for bifurcation, so we maintain the delay parameter below the bifurcation, and we change C here. And what we can see is Bayesian entropy to the left of the pitch for bifurcation is 0 because we only have one attractor. And to the right of the pitch for bifurcation, the Bayesian entropy remains constant, right? But there's no change in Bayesian entropy. This is for three sizes of box. There is no change in Bayesian entropy when approaching the pitch for bifurcation. And this was shown by this paper of Wagemacher, and also in delayed systems. Bayesian entropy is not a great tool to identify pitch for bifurcations because there's no transformation in phase space in this type of bifurcation. But when we approach the Hopf bifurcation, it's another story, right? So Bayesian entropy to the left of the Hopf bifurcation is 0 because we only have oscillations. And near the Hopf bifurcation, there's no multistability. There's only one limit cycle that is stable. But to the right, we have something very interesting. Really far from the Hopf bifurcation, Bayesian entropy remains constant. And when we start approaching the Hopf bifurcation, Basin entropy peaks near the Hopf bifurcation, but not quite in the bifurcation, and then descends to the Hopf bifurcation. This linear part in the Hopf bifurcation, it's also in accordance with what they've seen in non-delayed systems near Hopf bifurcations, and Basin entropy can be used to identify this Hopf bifurcation. But there's also a peak here that indicates that there must be another bifurcation or something is happening in phase space before the Hopf bifurcation, right? So here we can see Basin entropy in terms of both parameters, and as we can see, Basin entropy peaks for the three sizes of the boxes. Basin entropy peaks here near the Hopf bifurcation, but not quite in the Hopf bifurcation. And this was shown analytically in a paper. So this line where Basin entropy peaks is precisely where the oscillations are born. So in this system, you have the Hopf bifurcation that is the point where the two fixed points become unstable. But you also have a bifurcation prior to that where the oscillations are born. And you have a small region that is between this line and this dashed line, which is the Hopf bifurcation. A small region where they coexist, oscillations with the two fixed points. So Basin entropy help us, well, identify the Hopf bifurcation, but also identify this other bifurcation that is shown analytically by Redmond in this paper. Okay, that's all great, but this has two problems. First, all which I shown you here is shown analytically. So the Hopf bifurcation and the pitchfork can be obtained analytically, and this Takens-Bogdanov, this coexistence of the oscillations with the fixed points is also shown by Redmond. So we would like to get this in a system where we cannot perform these things analytically. And also, we have the problem that for these computations, we did this reduction of the phase space using this sine function that is pretty much arbitrary. And we could use another parametric function as initial conditions. So what we did was then take the Mackie-Glass model that was, it's pretty famous, but it was introduced by Mackie and Glass in 1977 to model the production of blood cells in the bone marrow and their release into the bloodstream, where we have a delay parameter tau also, and then we have also this alpha parameter, which is the intensity. And what we did, so we don't take, so we don't use Runge-Kutta to simulate this system, but we use a discretization of the model in this map. So this is not an infinite dimensional model, but it's a n-dimensional model, and we take n as over 1,000, so it's a very high dimensional model. So it can be shown that this system has also two fixed points and a Hopf bifurcation line. We can see that analytically. And it's very multi-stable. So I'm going to introduce one more thing before showing you the results of Basin entropy in the Mackie-Glass model that is very useful, and that is Basin stability, which was well, I don't know if it was introduced there, but I first seen it in this paper and Wanban Meng. It's basically a measure of how big a basin of attraction is, so the volume in phase space of a basin of attraction. And what you do is simply you take random points in the phase space, like a Monte Carlo simulation, and you calculate how many go to one attractor or how many go to other. In time-delayed systems, because you have infinite dimensions, what they do is very ingenious. They take a basis of the function of the space of functions limited to minus tau and 0, any basis, and you just truncate it in some place, and you use that truncation as your new phase space, right? So you reduce the dimensionality of the phase space to whatever n here that you have. And then in that space, so for example, you could use a Fourier basis as a sine and a cosine. And you can, in that space, you can compute the space instability, and they show in a Hopfield neuron model with delay, with time delay, they show it has 4 stable solutions, and 2 of them die out when you increase the delay parameter. So we can use this in the Mac-Glass model and use this to compute Bayesian entropy also, because in the original paper they divide the phase space in uniform boxes, but we do not have to do that. So what we do is sample random boxes in phase space, in this very high dimensional phase space, and we compute the Bayesian entropy of those boxes. And because Bayesian entropy is the mean of this quantity, it should converge to some value if given enough boxes. And we see in the Mac-Glass model, we see that this value converges not only with the number of boxes that we take, but also the number of trajectories per box that we use to make the simulations. So then we can compute Bayesian stability and Bayesian entropy in the Mac-Glass model. And so here what I show in the diagram to the left is the parameter space of the Mac-Glass model. We sample 100,000 trajectories, and we count how many of them are different. This is shown in this diagram. And then we compute the Bayesian entropy in the right diagram. And as you can see here, Bayesian entropy, so there's a very large region where Bayesian entropy is 0 here. Then we have a line here where Bayesian entropy is peaking, right? So if we follow what we've seen, this might be a bifurcation of the system, right? And what we do with Bayesian stability, so these diagrams here are the volume, the fractional volume of each attractor is in color here. And the black attractor is a chaotic attractor, right? And what we see here is, for example, this region where we have entropy 0 is because we only have chaos. And when we approach this chaotic region, entropy peaks. Entropy peaks when chaos is born, and then decreases as we approach only chaos solutions, right? And this happens for both. This happens along all the line. So here, this crisis where chaos is born, I cannot perform analytically, but using Bayesian entropy, one can anticipate, right? Because Bayesian entropy peaks there and then decreases, and you can say, well, the phase space suffered a transformation there. And well, we show that that transformation is the birth of a chaotic attractor in phase space, right? So we cannot visualize phase space because it's very high dimensional, but doing this, we can see that there's something happening in that region. And it has not to do with the number of attractors that appear, because if you see here, we have only 4 attractors and Bayesian entropy peaks there, even though there's not a lot of multi-stability in the system there. So what we did next is, because I say that we have a chaotic attractor, but we could have more than one chaotic attractor, right? It's not very simple to distinguish between chaotic attractors, and it's not very simple to distinguish between chaotic attractors when you cannot see phase space or you cannot visualize phase space in very high dimensional systems. So what we did was perform the maximum Lyapunov exponent and then the first two Lyapunov exponents of the system. And here we can see that the system suffers another transformation here, where the second Lyapunov exponents become positive in this white region here. So that might indicate that the system has more than one chaotic attractor, right? So, for example, the attractors here cannot be the same attractor here, and then, well, probably the system had time or some type of a transformation there. That is a work in progress because, as I said, it's not very easy to distinguish between chaotic attractors in this type of system, or we don't have the means to do that right now. So to conclude, we evaluated the predictability of this type of systems. We encountered that Bayesian entropy captures the Hopf bifurcation, but it does not capture the Pitchford bifurcation, and that is the same case in non-delayed systems. We also encountered that Bayesian entropy helps identify other types of transformations in the phase space, such as a crisis in the Mackey glass system. And we've seen that using Bayesian entropy and Bayesian stability, we can capture changes in the phase space of very high dimensional systems where you cannot visualize these spaces conventionally. So this work was published in two papers. The first one is the one that with the double well model and the Pitchford bifurcation and the Hopf bifurcation, and the second one is with the one where we explore the Mackey glass model and the crisis. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you very much, Juan Pedro. Comments or questions? Ricardo?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Juan, I appreciated very much your work in Bayesian entropy. And as far as I know, this is the first time one has applied this method to delay systems. Is it correct?
I really don't know. I believe so. Yes, we didn't find much work with Bayesian entropy in delay systems.
Yes, me too. I also believe this is the first time, because in principle this is an infinite dimensional system. So it's very interesting to see the application of this method to such systems. So very interesting work.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if there are no more questions or comments.
I have a very, I guess, not simple, but naive in a way, just question for one.
Yes, please.
You mentioned at the end, right? That you believe this chaotic attractor is being transformed somehow.
Yes.
Could you give like some insights into how you could maybe try to study this in a bit more detail?
Well, the thing is, it's very hard, right? Because, for example, if you had a three-dimensional system, you can have two chaotic attractors, very different chaotic attractors, and if you can see the phase space, you can see they are not the same, right? And as far as I know, that's how people identify two different chaotic attractors on multistability in chaotic regions of these systems.
So this is what I was thinking. Sorry to,
Okay.
but just because this is kind of what I was thinking, right? So do you know the work of George that Satis?
Yeah.
So,
In fact, most of the calculations are used using dynamical systems. Yeah. Okay.
cool. Yeah. So there's this recurrences method to identify attractors, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so which is basically looking at how trajectories recur in state space, and I mean, he has a few. I remember there were some cool examples of two chaotic attractors coexisting in state space and being very close to each other, and they're close to each other if you look at it, right? But the recurrences method, if your partitioning of the state space is fine enough, it would distinguish them, no problem.
Yeah. What I've encountered, I tried using it in this type of systems, and with high-dimensional phase space, it's very intensity-wise. I don't know how to say it, but it's very computer intensive, right? So you need a lot of time to do it, and I couldn't do it, but maybe it's a better way of trying to find these attractors. He also has some work with instead of recurrence, you use some parameters to identify different attractors. So you try to parameterize the attractors and the thing is, what I've encountered is the best parameters are the Lyapunov exponents, and computing them is also it needs a lot of resources. So it's not an easy task, or for me, maybe there's some work I haven't found that does this.
That's true. I think it's not true too. Yeah. I mean, I know more recently they also implemented this way of you don't partition the state space in homogeneous grid, like in a regular grid, but you can make the grid, the size of the partitions vary, and so that can make this problem way more efficient. Maybe that would help, but
okay, it's been a while since I used the package, so maybe there's something that can be done there.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. It's a really cool system. It would be a really cool example.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all. I don't know if it's Elber. We are going to announce next seminars.
Yes, our next seminar will be on August 27th, and also we have two very important workshops and conference. One is organized by Professor Arturo, right? You can next week.
Next week.
And also in the 1st August, we'll have in Rio Claro, Brazil, the Nonlinear, which is the conference, NCS, the National Conference of Nonlinear Complex Systems in Rio Claro. Okay, I will put the advertisement in the Instagram. And if you want something to be announced in our Instagram, please send it to me and follow them. Let me put in the so you just need to put in our Instagram the following. Okay, and you're able to follow us on our on our network. We have several followers, but we need to have another one. Thank you so much, Arturo. Thank you so much, Kaleo and Juan. And let us. I'm looking forward to see both of you next month.
Okay. Thank you.